Defining fascism is challenging.
Fascism is the idea that the group is more important than the individual.
That's too broad. There are other ideologies where the collective is more important than the individual, like state socialism or Confucianism.
Contemporary fascists share three core beliefs. 1. People of European heritage are or ought to constitute a biological, cultural, and political unity known as the white race.
That's too specific and incorrect, because there are fascisms in non-European countries too, and certainly not all fascisms have the white race as a core belief.
Fascism is a form of socialism. Fascists are socialists with a national identity.
Wow, that's probably the worst definition I have ever seen. And wrong. Fascism is neither a form of socialism nor a left-wing ideology. But the question is, why is it so hard to define what fascism is? Since its inception, the label fascist has been used lightly as an insult against political enemies or those who disagree. This isn't entirely the fault of people who use the word too lightly. The truth is, it's genuinely difficult to define what fascism is, and to this day, no academic consensus has been reached, and probably never will be, to identify the essence of fascism, what they call generic fascism or fascist minimum. Some argue that fascism only existed in Italy under Mussolini and in Germany under Hitler, a view I find reductive and wrong. Others offer definitions so vague they end up being meaningless. Liberalism or socialism haven't sparked such debates and misunderstandings about their nature as fascism has, because they have more consistent theoretical doctrines worldwide. Besides, in different countries, fascism manifested in quite unique ways. The problem with defining fascism is that its elements, taken individually, can be found in many ideologies. Nationalism was closely tied to liberalism, but Marxist ideologies also mingled with nationalism. The legitimization of violence, the cult of a charismatic leader, anti-communism, or opposition to liberal democracy aren't exclusive to fascism. Some have even said that fascism is an elusive chameleon that can adopt many forms. This is what allowed fascist movements to attract people from very diverse ideological backgrounds, from traditional conservatism, liberalism, republicanism, monarchism, socialism, or communism. However, fascism is certainly more capable of attracting elements from the right and center than from the left. In any case, I'm here to provide answers to what fascism is, so first let's start with how some experts in fascism define this ideology, and later I will talk about fascism in the interwar period and my take on what fascism is. Roger Griffin, one of the foremost authorities on the study of historical fascism, provided this concise definition of fascism. Quote, "Fascism is a genus of political ideology whose mythic core, in its various permutations, is a palingenetic form of populist ultranationalism." End quote. Palingenetic means that it seeks to regenerate the nation, which it views as a living organism in decline or sick that must change and be revitalized to become strong and glorious again. Philosopher Umberto Eco wrote a popular essay in which he spoke of an fascism or eternal fascism, defined by 14 points. But to avoid making this video too long, I'm showing on a screen Wikipedia's summary from that essay for those watching the video. I don't like having to bring up Stanley Payne because he's an apologist for Francoism and continues to spread the myth of a communist plot in Spain in 1936 to justify the military coup, but this American historian is still considered a reference in the study of fascism, and he created a useful table to describe common characteristics of fascisms. In it, Payne establishes that the ideology and goals of fascisms are the following: creating a modern and revitalized culture for the nation, creating a nationalist authoritarian state, organizing the national economy with highly regulated corporations of employers and workers to promote class collaboration, and viewing violence and war positively. Robert Paxton, in his book The Anatomy of Fascism, provided this brief definition. Quote, Fascism may be defined as a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and by compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants, working in uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites, abandons democratic liberties and pursues with redemptive violence and without ethical or legal restraints goals of internal cleansing and external expansion." End quote. Today, openly fascist movements still exist, and others could become fascist if the right circumstances arise in the future. However, focusing on fascisms between the 1920s and 1940s reveals several common traits. The first is totalitarianism, a regime that seeks to control all aspects of public and private life through one-party rule, propaganda, symbols, an absence of checks and balances, and the ruthless repression of political dissent. Thus, by definition, fascism is anti-liberal, meaning it opposes parliamentary democracies and views debates as a sign of weakness compared to the blunt and violent imposition of will. Fascism believes in the omnipotence of the state over the individual. In the most extreme forms of fascism, like Nazism, devotion to God was supplanted by devotion to the state. However, in what has been called clerical fascism, in Austria or Spain, devotion to God and the state could coexist. One aspect where there is unanimity in describing fascisms is that they are an extreme manifestation of nationalism. Nationalism is based on xenophobic and racist ideas with identified internal and external enemies, and it often expresses irredentist and imperialist ideas. Fascism sells the idea of a nation in decline that needs to be reborn with new strength, viewing the nation as a living organism composed of individuals who share ancestry or culture and are part of an inseparable whole. That is why Roger Griffin defines fascism as palingenetic. This conception of the nation and totalitarianism explains why fascism is anti-individualist and anti-intellectual. It does not tolerate critical thinking and dissent, promoting instead a personality cult of a charismatic leader whom citizens must revere as a messiah and obey blindly. In short, fascism kills freedom because it places the interests of the nation, which are whatever the dictator says, above the individual. The individual loses their self-autonomy and becomes a slave to the state and its leader. Fascism does not have a defined utopia, unlike Marxism, which aims for a classless society, or anarchism, which seeks to eliminate all hierarchies, including capitalism and the state. Fascism pursues something much more ambiguous and emotional: the greatness of the nation. This desire for national greatness is linked to ideas of a nation constantly mobilized for war, either to conquer territories and form an empire, or to eliminate internal enemies. Fascist views on violence were greatly influenced by social Darwinism, as they believed that only the strongest nations could survive, impose themselves, and enslave others. Fascism is militaristic and views violence positively, not only as a tool to conquer and maintain power, but also as a means to regenerate the nation. Fascism dehumanizes the political opponent and adopts a military lexicon, using terms like battle, discipline, victory, enemy, and heroism. It exalts virility, the fighting spirit, and sacrifice, glorifying the death of its members as exemplary and heroic. This ties to the rebellious spirit of Romanticism and an exaltation of youth, sports, and technological modernity. Economically, because of its totalitarianism, fascism aims to control major industries through nationalizations or other means, and promotes corporatism. This involves the formation of state corporations, or guilds to be more precise for an English-speaking audience, made up of employers and workers from the same sector to theoretically foster class cooperation instead of the socialist class struggle. A common characteristic in all fascisms is their vigorous anti-communism. Fascist rhetoric can be anti-materialist against both communism and capitalism, but in reality fascists have always sided with the bourgeoisie, and they merely place their political leaders among the country's elite. Fascists proclaim themselves as revolutionaries, but the revolution consists of purifying and regenerating the nation by eliminating internal enemies rather than changing the social structure or economic system to make it fairer and freer. They praise hierarchies and subordination, viewing the masses as tools or cattle that can be mobilized through nationalist fervor. Because of all these ideas and their social conservatism regarding family, patriarchy, sexuality, and religion, fascism has been rightly defined as an extreme right-wing movement, not an extreme left-wing one. So, summing up everything I have said, what is fascism? That fascist minimum or generic fascism that goes beyond countries and time. Fascism is an ideology that, in some ways, stems from the French Revolution due to the mobilization of the masses, but in other ways it opposes it and is counter-revolutionary due to its irrationalism, contempt for equality, and opposition to popular sovereignty. Fascism is defined in opposition to others. It is an ideology built negatively rather than constructively. Fascism feeds on fear, discontent, and frustration. No ideology is defined more by its hatreds than fascism. Fascists hate other nations, communism, liberalism and parliamentary democracy, individualism, anarchism, pacifism, cosmopolitanism and any foreign influence, globalization, intellectuals, deviations from heterosexuality and conservative gender roles. The list goes on. I mentioned at the beginning the problem of defining what fascism is. What is important to keep in mind is that it's not enough to take individual ideas or methods to define an organization or a person as fascist, because many ideas and actions are not exclusive to fascism. What matters is the big picture. Examining the sum of ideas and actions is what will allow us to determine whether the fascist label fits or not. So, this is my take on what fascism is. Fascism is a reactionary, right-wing ideology that is anti-democratic, anti-communist, nationalist with a victimizing and revitalizing discourse, and views violent speech and actions as legitimate means in politics. Consider these 4 elements as a checklist for defining a movement or a person as fascist. Can you think about any relevant contemporary politician or party that fits this description? Tell me in the comment section. Of course, these are just my conclusions after researching the issue. And you can disagree in the comments because there isn't even academic consensus on defining fascism. Despite everything, I hope this video has helped to highlight some fundamental features of fascism and why it is a more difficult ideology to define than others. If you like it and want more of my content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube channel or the podcast New History of Spain. And you can support my work on Patreon and gain exclusive benefits or with one-time donations. Links in the description. Thank you for listening and see you next time!